I stepped into the hotel lobby as the warm yellow lights washed over the marble floor, making everything look polished enough to reflect people's pretenses. The air was cool, and the soft clink of glasses drifted out from the restaurant inside. Just as I was pulling the scarf from my neck, my phone buzzed. "I have to work late." Eric's message flashed across the screen. Short, flat, not even a period. The kind of text he used when he didn't want me asking anything else. I stared at it for a few seconds, just long enough to register it, then slipped my phone back into my bag. A server walked up to me. He smiled politely and asked if I needed help. I said Eric's name. One beat, exactly one beat, and his eyes lowered as he motioned to the right. "Table 9, miss." I turned my head. Table 9 sat by the glass wall, where every movement reflected clearly. And there he was, my husband, Eric, not hunched over a laptop because he was working late. He was holding a glass of wine, leaning slightly toward a woman sitting across from him. I stood still, silent, cold, calm, watching him the way someone watches a poorly edited scene play out. The woman was young, wearing a teal dress that hugged her shape, her hair in loose waves, every gesture polished as if rehearsed. She placed her hand on Eric's. He didn't pull away. They looked like a couple talking about an engagement, a picture-perfect moment for anyone passing by to assume I was the one arriving late to my own life. I didn't walk toward them. I didn't need to. I just watched every detail the way you read the source code of a broken program, the way Eric's eyes shifted left every time she touched him, the too-perfect smile he gave when she laughed, and how the two of them weren't anywhere near as natural as they were trying to appear. There was no real connection. The knife didn't come from seeing him with someone else. It came from the fact that he thought I would fall apart over a setup this clumsy. I took a quiet breath and looked at them one more time, and in my head, a single thought surfaced, cold and almost weightless. To understand this scene, you have to go back a few weeks. Back then, I was still Mia, a data analyst who spent her days separating behavior patterns from noise. I liked things neat, like sitting in my small kitchen with my laptop, liked watching everything long enough to understand what others believed they'd hidden well. Eric said I was too quiet, but that was just how I processed the world. My husband, Eric, was a project manager, the type who liked to control everything as if it would disappear the moment he let go. That might have helped him at work. In a marriage, it turned suffocating. The first signs didn't come from anything he said, but from small movements. Eric started asking where I went every evening, even though he'd never cared before. He checked my card statements the way he checked errors in an employee's report. One time, I bought flowers for my desk, and he stared at the receipt for a long moment. "Who gave these to you?" I answered simply, "I bought them myself." He went quiet, but it was the silence of someone who didn't believe it. On weekends, he suddenly had urgent work. Strange, considering he used to hate missing any time with me. Now he disappeared for whole mornings and came back with a guarded look I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything. I just watched. On nights when I sat reviewing work emails, I could feel something shifting in our small home, a kind of anxiety that didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. Lately, everything he said had this sharp, defensive edge. "Why are you home so late? Who were you with? What did you withdraw money for?" I answered briefly, clearly, no circling around, and it was exactly that calmness that seemed to make him tenser. One night, I watched him step out onto the balcony to take a call. I didn't need to hear the words, just the way he stood, shoulders slightly stiff, back turned toward the door, hand covering half his mouth, was enough to tell me he was hiding something. But not the kind of hiding that comes from cheating. It was the kind that comes from being afraid of getting caught. I didn't question him. I never asked anything unless I had enough data. And at that point, the data showed only one thing. Eric wasn't cheating. He was preparing something he believed I wouldn't notice. He was building something, and I just didn't know yet what he planned to use it to test. I wasn't in a hurry. He was. I simply waited for the moment everything revealed itself in the way he thought he controlled. But even then, there was one truth I already knew with certainty. I was a few steps ahead of him. In the days that followed, Eric's controlling behavior didn't just increase, it sharpened. The way someone behaves when they think they're hiding it well. He asked where I went every lunch break, every question delivered with an analytical tone that didn't fit a husband. What time did you leave the office? Why did you come home 30 minutes early today? Who did you meet without texting me? I kept my answers tight. Coworkers, work, had a meeting. No extra explanation. And every time I kept it short, he looked at me like the answer was too simple to be true. Then came the bills. He examined every line of my statements like they were reports he had to sign off on. What did you buy at this store? Who did you transfer money to? What's this charge with no note? Each time he asked, I looked at him for a few seconds before saying, You're taking this too far. He answered with the same line every time. I just want to make sure you're not hiding anything. His voice didn't sound worried. It sounded accusatory. I wasn't angry. I just observed. To me, every question felt like system logs from a broken program, appearing regularly, piling up, and revealing that the issue lay with the one running the system, not the one being inspected. One evening, I told him I was having dinner with coworkers. He never used to care, but that night, he stared at me for a long time before saying, Who are you going with? 4 people? Any men? I buttoned my coat and said, Yes. He went still. His eyes shifted slightly, not with jealousy, but with the look of someone who just heard exactly what he wanted to confirm his suspicion. When I got home, he was sitting at the dining table with a face so flat it looked unnatural. Did you have fun? He asked. It was okay. He smiled, but not a real one. I poured myself some water, and the two of us sat there in a silence that stretched like a straight line with a no end point. Then a detail fell into place, right when I wasn't looking for one. Eric forgot to lock his laptop. He stepped outside to take a call. I walked past the table to grab a folder I'd left there. The screen was on. Mixed in with his work emails was a thread with a private agency. I didn't touch anything, didn't move the mouse. I just read the subject line and the first few lines. Personnel to play the fiancé role. Monitoring period, 3-4 weeks. Target, client's wife. I didn't need more than that. I didn't need to open anything. I just walked to the sofa and sat down as if I hadn't seen a thing. When Eric came back, he asked, What did you grab from the table? Documents, I said. He nodded. Too quick? Too light? I looked at him for a few seconds, then said softly but clearly, You think I don't notice the way you look at your phone every time I walk into the room? He flinched. Half a second later, he forced a smile. I'm just busy. I nodded and left it there. Silence was what bothered him most, but it was also what let me see the clearest. From the moment I read that email, every piece fell into place. Eric wasn't cheating. There wasn't another woman. He was paranoid that I was the one cheating. That fear pushed him to hire an actress to follow me, to build some fiancé scenario to test my reaction or corner me into slipping up. I looked back at my own schedule from the past few weeks, the times I met friends, the days I withdrew money for personal errands, the nights I came home late because of presentations, all completely normal. But for someone like Eric, normal could turn into something else if he wanted it to. And then another detail surfaced on its own. He withdrew money from a secondary account, an account he'd never mentioned. The withdrawal lined up with the dates on those agency emails. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Every time Eric thought he was hiding something from me, he was really just opening another door. I stayed quiet, not because I was giving in, but because I wanted to see how far he planned to take this. One evening after dinner, Eric was watching the news while I went through some documents. He kept glancing at me, the way someone watches and waits for you to slip. I looked up right as I caught that stare. Something wrong? I asked. He paused, then shook his head. No, I just want to make sure you're okay. I said, I'm fine. I'm not sure you are. My voice wasn't raised. It wasn't sharp. It was just a fact placed on the table. He turned away immediately. From that moment, I knew clearly. He was getting ready for the next step. Any test like his always has a final stage, the part where the tester believes they've pushed the target into a corner where they'll reveal something. I just waited for that message, and it came on a Thursday night, right after I left the office. Eric texted, I have to work late tonight. The familiar line, the familiar wording, exactly the style he used whenever he was setting a stage for something. I stared at the text for a long moment. Nothing hurt. Nothing surprised me. Only one quiet, clear thought passed through my mind. Now it's my turn to watch him perform. I walked into the hotel like someone who knew she wasn't the passive character in this scene. No rush, no attempt to hide how I felt. I just moved through the wide lobby where the white lights reflected off the stone floor, creating a cold glow that matched my mood. The server recognized Eric's name the moment I said it. He smiled, then tilted his head slightly toward the tables by the glass wall. Table 9, miss. I gave a small nod. Nothing surprising. If Eric had made a reservation, of course the staff would say his name like they knew it well. I followed the direction the server pointed. Table 9 was in the most visible spot, the perfect choice for someone trying to stage a clear, deliberate scene. And there was Eric, leaning slightly toward the woman he'd hired. They were both smiling in the way people do when they're trying to look close. I stood a short distance away, far enough that they'd notice me only if they happened to glance over, but close enough for me to study every detail. The woman rested her arm on the table, tilting her head toward Eric as if they'd known each other for years. Eric nodded along to everything she said, his smile stiff enough for me to see he was acting. A sweet moment. Sweet enough to be fake. I let out a quiet breath, not from pain, from confirmation. I'd been reading this exactly right. I didn't walk toward table 9. I turned left to table 6, an empty table slightly off to the side, but with a direct view of them. I sat down as if the seat had been reserved for me. The server looked surprised. I'll sit here, I said, calm, like everything was already arranged. He nodded and handed me a menu. I opened it without looking at a single word. I knew Eric would see me sitting alone, see me refusing to step onto the stage he'd drawn for me. My silence was the thing that bothered him most. I ordered in an even, steady voice, a simple appetizer, a glass of water. No shaking hands, no tension, no avoiding anyone's eyes. I didn't have to say anything, but sitting at table 6 was already its own message. I wasn't part of the scene he built at table 9. The woman stood up to go to the restroom about 10 minutes later. Right as she walked past my table, I lifted my head, not rushed, not confrontational. I just said one thing, her real name, the name only the agency and the client would know, not the soft, charming name she used when talking to Eric. She froze immediately. Silence dropped between us like a thin blade. She turned toward me, eyes widening for half a second, just long enough to show the truth. She never expected me to know. I looked straight into her eyes. No change in my expression, no extra words. She just stood there, stiff, as if someone had yanked the script right out of her hands. I lowered my gaze to my glass and slowly turned it between my fingers. She walked on, but her steps were out of rhythm. Eric finally noticed me when the woman still hadn't returned. I saw him glance my way, his eyes widening just a little, as if his mind was running through a list of questions. Why was I here? Why at that table? Did I know? Then he stood up, pretending he was just looking for her, but he walked straight to my table. Mia? His voice was tight, trying hard to stay calm. Why are you following me? I looked up at him for one steady beat. No surprise, no reaction, just a look that made it clear. I wasn't the one doing the following here. I didn't stand. I didn't speak for a few seconds. I let him sit in my quiet, the thing he feared most. Then I said one sentence, just enough for him to swallow before he could respond. If you're going to test me, at least pick someone who doesn't let her earpiece show when she leans down. Eric froze. His mouth opened and closed, no words forming fast enough. He looked around, afraid someone else might hear, but a few people at nearby tables had already started to turn their heads. The woman returned to table 9 right then. Her face still hadn't recovered from the moment I said her real name. Eric looked at her, then at me, then back at her. Everything he'd tried to build, the whole stage scene, collapsed in minutes like cheap paint washing off in water. I didn't yell. I didn't stand. I just spoke, loud enough for both of them to hear, but not enough to turn it into public drama. You hired someone to follow me. The agency emails are still on your laptop. And you assumed I was cheating because I came home late a few nights. I listed each detail clearly, like reading data off a spreadsheet. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. The woman lowered her eyes. Eric tried to speak. Mia, you're misunderstanding. I cut him off with nothing but a look. No words needed. A few customers nearby whispered, not mockingly, but like they were witnessing something sharp and unexpected, a mask pulled off too cleanly. Eric didn't know where to put his eyes, and in that moment, when he was completely unmoored, I stood up, picked up my bag, and ended this part of it with one last line. Quiet enough not to sound theatrical, but firm enough to pin down the truth he kept running from. You're watching the wrong person. Eric stood there, half his face drained of color, trying to rebuild the control that had slipped out of his hands long ago. I pulled my chair back and sat down again, not letting him think I was going to walk away yet. I wanted him to understand that his exposure wasn't accidental. It was a process he let himself into, and I only watched from the outside. I placed my bag on my lap, unzipped it, and took out a folded sheet of paper, the statement I'd printed at the office that morning. I slid it to the edge of the table, not fully pushing it toward him, but not pulling it back either. You want honesty from me, I said, my voice steady. But you hid this. Eric looked at the paper like it was something foreign. His hand trembled just slightly, enough for me to see that he knew exactly what it was. Your secondary account, I continued, the one you thought I wouldn't find. The woman, standing behind him, caught between leaving and staying, lowered her head. She didn't have a role to hold on to anymore. I didn't wait for Eric to react. I tapped lightly on the withdrawal amount shown on the statement. This is the money you paid the agency, I said, withdrawn the same day you emailed them about the fiancée surveillance package. Eric swallowed hard. You went through my accounts? His voice was weaker than I'd ever heard it. No, I said. You left too many traces. Anyone looking closely enough would see them. A few customers at nearby tables had stopped eating. They didn't jump in, but the story hung in the air now. Eric could feel it. And that was what made him step back. I read every number, every transaction date, as clearly as if I were presenting a report in a meeting. The first withdrawal, the second payment, the empty memo line, the mistake of someone who thought he'd erased enough. He blinked fast, like he was trying to stitch together a reasonable explanation in his head. But everything had fallen apart long before he opened his mouth. You've got it wrong, he started, his voice shaking. I set the paper in the center of the table and looked him straight in the eyes. Relax, I said. You're only scared because I know the truth. That made his shoulders drop a little. No more powerful project manager, just a husband afraid of being seen clearly. The woman drew a quiet breath, then said, I'm sorry. I was just following the contract. I turned to her, my voice unchanged. You're just doing your job. I don't blame you. That surprised her, and it made Eric lower his head, because the moment I said I wasn't angry at the person hired to watch me, he became the only one in the scene with no place left to stand. She nodded slightly, almost grateful, then stepped back as if removing herself from a confrontation where she no longer had a role. Eric reached out like he wanted to take my hand, as if he could pull everything back to the version of reality he preferred. But I pulled my hand away before he could touch me. He whispered, "Can we talk in private? At home. We can talk there." I looked at him for a long moment, long enough for him to understand that what I was about to do wasn't impulsive. I placed my napkin on the table, stood up. The chair made only a small sound as it slid across the floor, small but sharp enough that Eric froze. He grabbed my wrist. "Mia, don't go. This is just a misunderstanding." I looked at his hand on mine. No pulling, no struggle. I simply tilted my head, letting my voice cut through his panic. "You built an entire control game just to avoid facing what you're hiding." I let that sentence fall into the space between us. No extra words, no explanation. Then I pulled my hand back, soft but final. Eric opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. There was no reasonable excuse for the numbers I'd shown him. No clean explanation for hiring someone to pose as his fiancée. I looked at him one last time, and I delivered the line I'd kept to myself for weeks. A line that didn't need volume to slice cleanly through everything he was clinging to. "You're not afraid I'm cheating. You're afraid I'm awake." Nothing more. I turned away, walked across the lobby. The sound of my shoes tapping lightly on the stone floor set a calm rhythm that contrasted completely with the chaos Eric was sinking into behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was still standing there, his hand hanging uselessly in the air, his expression crushed under the weight of everything he'd done to himself. I just walked straight to the door, feeling one thing with absolute clarity. I didn't win because I fought back. I won because I stopped staying in a place where I could be controlled. And when I pushed the hotel door open, the night wind hit my face, carrying a freedom Eric never imagined I could take back so easily. Behind me, he was still watching, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. He knew he had lost, not because of anything I did, but because I knew too much. I moved into a small apartment in a quieter part of town, not too far from the center, but far enough that I could hear the wind instead of the arguments I'd been keeping in my head. I brought only a few things: clothes, my laptop, and the set of glass cups I liked. Everything else I left behind. There was no reason to carry anything that still smelled like control. Every morning, I made myself a glass of fruit juice and opened my laptop at exactly 7. Data analysis still demanded the same sharp focus as before, but for the first time in months, my mind had room to breathe. I reset my schedule, moved between projects, and let the numbers flow in naturally, without rushing to brace for Eric's scrutinizing stare every night. In the afternoon, I took walks around the neighborhood. No one asked where I was going. No text saying, "Are you home yet?" or "Who are you with?" No invisible eyes tracking me. Just my footsteps, steady and clean like a heartbeat settling back into its normal rhythm. At night, I turned on the warm lights, set my laptop on the table, and worked on a few more reports. No one stood behind me. No one watched what tabs I opened, who I messaged, or how I took notes. The quiet wasn't loud. It was strong in its own stillness. One evening, while I was reviewing data for a new project, The whole story about Eric drifted through my mind, not as a wound, more like a final exam problem I'd already solved. Eric never cheated on me, that's true, but he never trusted me either. That's the real issue. He couldn't handle losing control, so he built an entire stage scenario, hired someone to play a fiancée, and wrapped himself in lies he created. He watched me to make sure I wasn't doing anything wrong, but in doing that, he became the one who was wrong from the start. I looked toward the window, at the streetlights reflecting off the glass. A cold realization moved through me, light but clear. Some people don't betray you with another person. They betray you by refusing to trust you, even when you've done nothing. And Eric exposed his own nature through the very surveillance game he designed to test me. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. No bitterness, no regret. Just the truth sitting neatly in one final thought. The biggest lie is when someone doubts you so much that they turn themselves into the one who can't be trusted. I got up and turned off the light. The apartment slipped into silence. The kind of silence I'd been wanting for a long time. Maybe what I learned is this. A relationship only holds when both people trust each other, and when suspicion becomes a habit, you can lose the very thing you're trying to keep. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening all the way through. Have you ever felt misunderstood or controlled like that? Tell me in the comments. I always read them. And don't forget to support the channel with a subscribe and a like. I appreciate every bit of it. Thanks again for listening.